think you are, driving this car through my territory?
What you hide? Inside. The seats.
Your kind belongs in cuffs. You don't belong here.
Oh, really?
I am the law here.
Not anymore.
The rain hammered down like bullets, each drop exploding against the cracked pavement. Through the storm's fury came a sound, sharp, brutal, unforgiving. It was the sound of dignity being crushed beneath a steel-toed boot. Under the piercing glare of a patrol car's headlights, a heavy police boot pressed down hard against the rough asphalt. But it wasn't crushing gravel. It was grinding into an elegant golden silk scarf, a Hermes piece worth more than most people's monthly wages. The delicate fabric, once a symbol of grace and refinement, now lay crumpled and stained with mud and baseless hatred. "Who the hell do you think you are, driving this car through my territory?" The voice cut through the rain, thick with bourbon and arrogance. Deputy Sheriff Marcus Kane stood with his hands planted firmly on his hips, his swollen belly straining against the gun belt. He wasn't looking at the scarf he was destroying. His eyes were locked on the woman standing before him in the downpour. "Your kind should be in the back of a police van, wearing handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit," Marcus spat, hawking a glob of saliva that landed inches from the ruined silk. "Not sitting behind the wheel of a vehicle like this." Across from him, Isabella Monroe stood in silent defiance. Rainwater cascaded down her face, but it couldn't wash away the steel in her dark, penetrating eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She simply stood there watching him, and watching the scarf, the final gift her deceased husband had brought her from a Paris trip 31 years ago, being trampled by this man who wore a badge like a crown. To understand how the most powerful woman in the federal court system came to be standing barefoot in the mud of a forgotten border town, facing down an arrogant rural deputy with delusions of godhood, we need to rewind the clock. Just 16 minutes. 16 minutes that would change everything. Where are you from? Tell us in the comments below. And if you're loving this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more. 16 minutes earlier, the town of Cedar Ridge wasn't on any tourist map worth consulting. It sat wedged between ancient pine forests and a fog-choked state border where cell phone signals died, and the law seemed to have rotted along with the abandoned barns dotting the landscape. The sky hung perpetually gray, and the ground remained forever damp. This was a classic speed trap municipality, a place where revenue didn't come from industry or commerce, but from inflated speeding tickets and suspicious asset seizures targeting unlucky travelers. And the undisputed king of this trap was Marcus Kane. Marcus lounged in his black Ford Explorer, concealed behind the "Welcome to Cedar Ridge" sign, a rust-eaten billboard pockmarked with bullet holes. At 36 years old, his dissipated lifestyle made him look closer to 47. His face was flushed crimson from hypertension and cheap whiskey. His eyes, narrow slits of suspicion, constantly scanned for prey. He was the only son of the county sheriff, the crown prince of the border region. The badge pinned to his chest wasn't earned through merit or training. It had been handed to him as a 23rd birthday present from his father. To Marcus, the gun and badge were toys. The locals and passing motorists were pawns in his private game. "Boring as hell," Marcus muttered, leaning back with his boots propped on the dashboard. He pulled his Sig Sauer from its holster, ejected the magazine, and slammed it back in with a satisfying metallic click. 3 days had passed without any worthwhile catches, just a few logging trucks and drunk farmhands stumbling home. Marcus needed cash. He needed something valuable to confiscate. He needed entertainment. The rain intensified, transforming the old highway into a flowing black river. Marcus was about to fire up the engine and head back to the station when a sound penetrated the storm. a sound that didn't belong in Cedar Ridge. It wasn't the rough growl of a pickup or the tinny whine of a cheap modified sedan. This was a deep, powerful purr, a mechanical symphony, the growl of an aristocratic predator. Marcus bolted upright, boots slamming to the floor. He squinted through the rain-streaked windshield. From the distant curve, a pair of classic round headlights appeared, warm amber circles cutting through the fog like the eyes of something magnificent. Then it emerged fully into view, a 1956 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. The metallic silver finish, that legendary silver arrow color, refused to be dulled by mud or rain. Instead, it gleamed eerily, like a pearl rolling across black velvet. Perfect aerodynamic curves, an elongated hood, and most importantly, those legendary gullwing doors that opened upward like the wings of a mechanical angel. This wasn't just transportation. It was rolling art. It was heritage. It was an asset worth at least $3.2 million gliding through his miserable town. Marcus's eyes widened, his pupils dilating with pure greed. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly parched. "Mother of God," he whispered, "look at that beautiful machine." In Marcus's limited imagination, this car didn't represent history or engineering excellence. It represented money, serious money. His father, the sheriff, maintained a collection of seized vehicles in the barn behind their property, cars taken from dealers or from people who couldn't prove legal ownership. This Mercedes would become the crown jewel of the Kane family collection. But who was driving it? The vehicle glided past Marcus's hiding spot, moving slowly and cautiously. Marcus flipped on his high beams, flooding the classic car's windshield with blinding light. Through the glare, he saw the driver. The greedy smile on his lips twisted into a contemptuous sneer. It was a woman, a black woman. She wore a simple beret and a beige raincoat. Her leather-gloved hands controlled the ivory steering wheel with practiced gentleness. She didn't look like a wealthy socialite, and she didn't resemble a flashy entertainer. She looked too ordinary, too simple. Marcus's narrow mind immediately rendered judgment. Wrong, completely wrong. A woman like that couldn't possibly own a car like this. "Stolen," Marcus declared with absolute certainty, turning the ignition key. "Definitely stolen from some rich old white man. Or maybe she's the mistress of some cartel boss, running away with her lover's assets." Whatever the truth, Marcus saw opportunity. A woman of color, alone, driving $1 million vehicle through his territory. No bodyguards, no witnesses. This was the best catch he'd ever encountered. "Sorry, ma'am," Marcus said with mock politeness, his voice echoing in the patrol car. He reached out and flipped the siren's switch with theatrical flair. "But your little joy ride ends right here in Cedar Ridge. That car now belongs to the police department." The siren tore through the tranquility of the pine forest. Swirling blue and red lights bathed the gleaming silver body of the gullwing. The wolf had left his den, charging after prey he assumed was a helpless lamb, completely oblivious that he was rushing headlong toward a lion's jaws. Inside the Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing, the world felt entirely separate from the darkness and dampness of Cedar Ridge. The interior carried the scent of burgundy leather, that classic aroma of preserved luxury, 61 years old and still perfect. The patter of rain on the long aluminum hood sounded distant and muted, overpowered by the melancholic strains of Bach's cello Suite No. 1 flowing through the original speaker system. Isabella Monroe moved her hands lightly across the ivory steering wheel. She didn't grip it with tension. She held it tenderly, the way you'd hold an old lover's hand. For Isabella, this car wasn't merely transportation. It was a time machine. It was the embodiment of Robert, her late husband. Robert Monroe, a brilliant architect who loved her despite fierce opposition from both their families in the 1980s, who spent his life collecting and restoring mechanical masterpieces. This gullwing had been his greatest passion. "Sophie, this car is just like you," he'd once told her. "People see a cold exterior, but inside there's a passionate heart and an unbreakable structure." Today marked the 6th anniversary of Robert's death. Isabella had driven the car out of its climate-controlled garage in Washington, heading south, returning to the place of her birth to fulfill his final wish. to scatter his ashes in the Cedar Ridge River, where they'd shared their first kiss decades ago. She glanced at the oak box on the passenger seat. Inside wasn't just the judge's gavel that symbolized her current authority. There was also a small ceramic urn containing his ashes. "We're almost there, Robert," Isabella whispered, her voice carrying weight and sorrow. Suddenly, blinding blue and red lights erupted in her rearview mirror, interrupting her memories. The siren screamed, tearing through Bach's gentle melody. Isabella sighed, not with fear but with weariness. She checked the speedometer, 46 miles per hour in a 51-mile-per-hour zone. She'd been driving with absolute caution, knowing this car was too precious to risk with aggressive driving. Here we go again, she thought. This scene was painfully familiar. As a black woman driving through rural southern towns, she'd been pulled over more times than she cared to count. Broken taillight, improper lane change, suspicious demeanor, she knew the script by heart. But today, in Cedar Ridge, she sensed unusual hostility in the siren behind her. It was impatient, demanding, full of menace. Isabella calmly activated her right turn signal and steered the precious vehicle to the shoulder. She tried to find solid ground, but the roadside offered only soft, sticky mud. The wheels sank slightly into the earth with a squelching sound. She turned off the engine, silenced the music, removed her driving gloves and placed them neatly on her lap. She rolled down the window, allowing cold air and rain to strike her face. Then she waited. In the rearview mirror, she watched the officer emerge. He wasn't wearing a hat, letting the rain plaster his hair against his skull. He walked with an exaggerated swagger, his right hand resting loosely on his gun, his left holding a gleaming black baton. Marcus Kane approached not as a law enforcement professional, but as a conqueror. He didn't go directly to the window. Instead, he circled around the front of the car. Thump! Marcus raised the baton and struck the three-pointed star emblem on the grille, hard. Isabella winced. That was the original chrome plating from 1956. He continued walking along the car's body, letting the baton's tip scrape along the raised ridge of the hood. Though he didn't apply excessive force, Isabella still heard the dreadful screech of hard metal scoring the $1 million paint job. A thin scratch appeared, a scar on a work of art. Marcus stopped directly at the driver's side window. He didn't bend down to meet her at eye level. He remained standing tall, forcing her to look up at him, establishing immediate dominance. Rainwater from his jacket dripped onto her shoulder. "Well, well, well," Marcus said, his breath reeking of cheap liquor and tobacco. He let out a long, mocking whistle. "Pretty bird, too pretty to be in the hands of someone like you." Isabella looked up, her face expressionless. Her eyes that had stared down the most notorious criminals in the country, now regarded Marcus as if he were a stain on a courtroom floor. "Good evening, officer," she said, her voice refined, educated, and ice-cold. "Have I violated any traffic regulations?" Marcus chuckled, a contemptuous, ugly sound. He leaned down, pressing his face close to the window. "Violation," he repeated mockingly. "Where do you think you are, lady? Harvard Law School. Around here, your breathing can be a violation if I say it is." He jabbed the baton through the window, poking Isabella's shoulder. "Papers, license, registration, and authorization from the actual owner. Right now." Isabella didn't react to the physical insult. She slowly opened her wallet and extracted her license and registration, both wrapped in protective plastic. She handed them to him with both hands, a gesture so polite it bordered on sarcasm against his crudeness. "This is my vehicle, officer. All documentation is in my name." Marcus snatched the papers. He didn't bother using his flashlight to examine them properly. He just gave them a cursory glance, then sneered. "Isabella Monroe," he read her name with open mockery. "Sounds like a white lady's name. Where'd you get that? Buy it off the internet." "That is my legal name." "I don't believe you." Marcus held the papers, license, insurance, registration, up high, pretending to scrutinize them in the faint moonlight. Then his fingers loosened deliberately. Plop! The entire set of documents fell into the muddy puddle beside the wheel. Oops, Marcus said, his face showing zero remorse, only pure malice. My hands are slippery. It's raining pretty hard. Isabella looked down at her important documents sinking into the mud. She didn't move to retrieve them. She didn't rush to open the door. She simply turned her head slowly to look at Marcus. You just threw my identification onto the ground, she said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of gathering thunder. So what? Marcus challenged, his hand moving to rest on his handcuffs. Fake papers belong in the trash. I don't need to read garbage fabricated by a car thief. He violently jerked the car door handle. The gullwing door sprang upward like a bird's wing, fully exposing Isabella to the elements and his aggression. Get out of the car, Marcus roared. Now, before I drag you out and ruin those borrowed clothes. Isabella unbuckled her seatbelt. She knew the time for diplomacy had ended. All right, officer, she said, stepping her left foot out onto the cold, muddy ground. If you insist on doing it this way. She emerged from the vehicle, straightening to her full height. Though she stood a head shorter than Marcus, the presence radiating from her seemed to compress the space around him. She'd left the safety of her car and entered his muddy kingdom, but Marcus didn't realize he'd just invited a lion into a hyena's cage. Isabella stood planted in the mud, her expensive Italian leather loafers submerged in the cold red earth along Cedar Ridge's roadside. Rain lashed her face, soaking her neatly styled gray-streaked hair. She didn't flinch. She didn't tremble. She stood tall, hands hanging naturally at her sides, her deep black eyes locked on Marcus Kane. Marcus stood 3 paces away, his hand still resting casually on his gun. A satisfied smirk spread across his bloated face. He relished seeing these outsiders dragged down to the level of his town's filth. Good girl, Marcus slurred, his voice thick with threat. At least you know how to follow orders. He stepped closer, using the baton's tip to nudge the lapel of her raincoat. Take off the coat, he ordered. Isabella's brow furrowed slightly. Officer, it's raining and extremely cold. I didn't ask for your weather report, Marcus snapped. I need to check if you're concealing weapons or contraband on your person. Remove the jacket, now. Isabella sighed, a sigh compressing contempt. She slowly unbuttoned her coat and removed it, revealing the clothes underneath, an ivory silk blouse and perfectly tailored trousers. She draped the soaked jacket over her left arm. Turn around, Marcus motioned with his baton. Isabella complied, turning slowly to show she carried nothing dangerous. But Marcus wasn't searching for weapons. He was searching for weakness, and he was frustrated not to find it. She was too composed, too confident. That irritated him deeply. All right, stand still, Marcus pointed the baton at her face. If you move even 1 inch, I'll consider it resisting arrest, and I will tase you. I understand, Isabella replied curtly. Marcus turned his back on her, shifting his attention to the real prize, the Mercedes 300 SL gullwing. The car door remained open to the sky like the wing of a wounded silver bird. The patrol car's headlights illuminated the brilliant burgundy leather interior, highlighting its overwhelming luxury against the desolate forest backdrop. Marcus stepped closer, caressing the rain-soaked body. He felt the coldness of the metal and the smoothness of the original paint. My old man is going to love this, he muttered, loud enough for Isabella to hear. He didn't need to verify the VIN. He didn't need to call dispatch to check the registration. In his mind, the verdict had been delivered the moment he saw the driver's skin color. He turned back to look at Isabella, his smile widening to reveal tobacco-stained teeth. Listen up, Marcus announced loudly, his voice carrying over the rain's drumbeat. I'm not writing you a ticket. Oh, Isabella raised an eyebrow. So I'm free to leave. No, Marcus laughed, a wild, cackling sound. You're not going anywhere, and neither is this car. He pulled out his radio, pressing the talk button. Dispatch, this is Kane. I'm at mile marker 13 on Black Forest Road. I've stopped a suspicious individual, female, black, approximately 51 years old, driving a vehicle of unknown origin with out-of-state plates. He paused, looking at Isabella with a challenging gaze, then continued lying smoothly into the radio. I detect a strong odor of marijuana emanating from the vehicle. Subject shows signs of intoxication and is being uncooperative. I'm proceeding with civil asset forfeiture procedures. Call my father, call the sheriff to my location, and have our family's tow truck dispatched. We've hit the jackpot. He released the button, clipping the radio back to his shoulder. There, he said to Isabella, spreading his arms like a king granting a favor. That's how things work around here. I suspect this car is being used to transport narcotics or dirty money, or maybe you murdered some old white man to steal it. Officer, Isabella's voice rang out, cold and sharp as a scalpel. You're accusing me without any evidence whatsoever. You haven't even examined the documents you just threw in the mud. This vehicle is my legal property. Evidence? Marcus stepped forward, pressing his face close to hers. I am the evidence. My nose smells drugs. My eyes see a black woman driving a $1 million car. That's all the evidence I need to confiscate this vehicle. You can appeal in court if you have enough money to hire an attorney and wait about 6 years. He patted her cheek, a gesture of ultimate insult. But I don't think your kind has that kind of money. You're probably just a drug mule transporting product. He turned, walking toward the car. He wasn't planning to seal it. He was planning to search it, to see if there was cash or jewelry inside before his father arrived. Don't touch it, Isabella warned, her voice deep, carrying the resonance of distant thunder. That is my husband's memorial if you damage it. What then? Marcus interrupted, pulling his tactical knife from his belt. The blade gleamed under the headlights. What are you going to do? Call the police? I am the police. He stood beside the driver's seat, the blade glinting ominously. Let's see if there's any product hidden beneath this expensive leather. Marcus had crossed the red line. He wasn't just stopping a car anymore. He wasn't just humiliating someone. He was preparing to destroy the most precious thing Isabella owned, the last remaining piece of her late husband. Isabella stood frozen in the mud, the cold rain penetrating to her bones. But the fire inside her raged with increasing intensity. She looked at him, at the knife, at the car, her patience completely exhausted. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Kane, she muttered, the rain unable to completely muffle the ferocity in her voice. You want to find product? Fine. You'll find something heavier than drugs. Marcus didn't hear her. He plunged the knife tip into the burgundy leather seat. Rip! The sound of tearing leather echoed, ripping through the night and Isabella's last shred of composure. The battle had officially begun. The sound of tearing leather, slash, rip, still echoed in the damp air like the anguished cry of something alive. Isabella watched Marcus Kane's blade plunge deep into the burgundy seat cushion, upholstery her husband Robert had spent hundreds of painstaking hours hand-restoring. A wide, gaping slash appeared, exposing the pale yellow foam padding inside like an open, bleeding wound. Isabella's heart clenched. That wasn't just a car seat. That was where Robert sat during their honeymoon road trip. That was where he'd taught her to handle a manual transmission. That was memory itself, and this crude man had destroyed it in a moment of impulse. See that? Marcus sneered, extracting the knife. The tip was stained with bits of foam debris. He hadn't found any drugs, but the destruction brought him sick pleasure. It's empty inside, just like you. He whirled to face Isabella, his disappointment at not immediately discovering treasure instantly morphing into rage he wanted to vent on her. He felt offended by her composure. Why wasn't she crying? Why wasn't she on her knees begging? He stepped out of the car, advancing toward her with the gait of a hunting bear. His mud-caked boots stamped loudly on the pavement. Where are you hiding it? Marcus roared, pressing the knife close to her face, mere inches from her skin. I know you have product. Your kind never travels empty-handed. Officer, Isabella said, her voice maintaining incredible control though her heart hammered a war drum in her chest. You just destroyed private property of historical significance. That action exceeds the scope of any routine search. Scope, Marcus spat on the ground. I am the scope. I am the law in this godforsaken place. He looked down at her feet. Isabella wore handmade Italian leather loafers, dark brown, elegant, expensive. Even covered in mud, they exuded a luxury Marcus would never achieve in his lifetime. A wicked idea sparked in his mind. He wanted to see this woman break. He wanted to strip away the false aristocracy he believed she was projecting. He wanted to drag her down to Cedar Ridge's level of filth. "Take off your shoes," he ordered abruptly. Isabella frowned. "Excuse me." "I said take off your shoes," Marcus screamed, forcefully kicking her ankle with his mud-caked boot. "I need to check your shoes. Smugglers often hide drugs under the insoles, or diamonds, or razor blades." "Officer, it's raining and the temperature is dropping," Isabella said, trying to maintain rationality. "The ground is covered with broken glass and sharp stones. This demand is unreasonable and violates basic human rights." "Human rights?" Marcus cackled. He turned back to the patrol car as if seeking an audience for his joke. "Listen to her talking about human rights. You have no rights here except the right to remain silent and the right to do exactly what I tell you." He raised the knife high. "Take them off now, or I'll slice those shoes up while they're still on your feet." Isabella looked into his eyes. She saw madness. She knew he would follow through. And more importantly, she needed him to go further. She needed him to make a mistake so profound that no lawyer, no judge could save him. She slowly bent down, her movements deliberate, not from submission, but because she wanted to engrave this moment into her memory. She removed the left shoe, the soft leather separating from her foot. She placed it on the hood of the patrol car beside them, avoiding the mud. Then the right one. Now Isabella Monroe, Chief Judge of the US Court of Appeals, the powerful woman who had sentenced the country's most notorious crime bosses and corrupt politicians, stood barefoot on the deserted roadside. She placed her bare foot on the ground. Cold, that was the first sensation. The bone-chilling cold of November mud penetrated the soles of her feet, running up her spine like electricity. The sticky, viscous mud seeped between her toes, clinging to her flesh like hungry parasites. Sharp, tiny stones hidden beneath the mud cut into her skin, causing throbbing pain. She flinched slightly but kept her back straight. She didn't curl her toes. She didn't hop to avoid the cold. She stood firm, her feet rooted to the earth like an ancient oak tree in a storm. Marcus looked down at her bare feet sinking into the mud. He felt satisfied. The image of the elegant woman forced to stand barefoot in his town's filthy puddle made him feel more powerful than ever. He'd stripped away her veneer of civilization. He picked up her shoes. He didn't check inside them. He simply turned them over, shaking them violently as if expecting a bag of white powder to tumble out. "Nothing." He clicked his tongue in disappointment. Then he threw her shoes, not back to her, but straight into the thorny bushes by the roadside. "Oops," he said again with the same casual tone. "Slippery hands. You can go pick them up yourself after I'm finished with you." Isabella watched the shoes disappear into the undergrowth. She didn't look after them. She turned back to Marcus. "Are you finished with your inspection?" she asked, her voice icy, colder than the rain pouring down on her. "Not yet." Marcus stepped closer. He used the baton's tip to lift her chin, forcing her to look directly into his eyes. He wanted to see fear. He wanted to see pleading. But in Isabella's deep black eyes, he saw nothing but the reflection of himself, a pathetic, soaked, vicious man. "You're stubborn," Marcus whispered, his liquor-tainted breath washing over her face. "But I like it. Breaking hard things is always fun." He backed away, turning toward the Merced's gullwing. "You didn't hide anything on your person. You didn't hide anything in your shoes, so it must be in the car." He raised the knife, the blade reflecting the headlights with cold steel menace. "I'm going to carve this car into pieces until I find what I want. And you," he pointed at Isabella's bare feet, "you will stand right there and watch me destroy it. Don't move. If you step out of that mud puddle, I will shoot." Marcus turned his back, plunging back into dissecting the car. He didn't know that the woman standing behind him wasn't just enduring. She was taking notes. In Isabella's mind, an invisible trial was taking place. Charge 1, unlawful stop. Charge 2, destruction of private property. Charge 3, abuse of authority causing corporal punishment. Charge 4, violation of fundamental human rights under the Geneva Conventions on Humane Treatment. Every second she stood in the cold mud was another year of imprisonment added to Marcus Kane's sentence. Go ahead, Isabella thought, her toes gripping the earth to suppress her shivering. Dig your own grave deeper, son. Marcus Kane burrowed into the cabin of the Merced's 300 SL Gullwing like a giant parasite digging inside a beautiful living organism. The flickering flashlight beam swept across the car's interior. To an expert, this was a mechanical sanctuary. Ivory steering wheel, handcrafted polished walnut dashboard, sophisticated analog gauges with gold-plated hands. Everything was original. Everything had been preserved by Robert Monroe like sacred treasure for 31 years. But to Marcus, this was just a hiding place for illegal goods. He didn't see beauty. He only saw cavities for stuffing narcotics. It must be here, Marcus mumbled, his liquor breath fouling the speedometer's face. He started with the passenger seat's smooth, gleaming burgundy leather. He raised the knife. This time he didn't make just one cut. He plunged the tip down, twisted, then sliced a brutal line from left to right. Slash. The sound was like flesh being torn. The 61-year-old leather, which had once cradled Isabella's shoulders on youthful road trips, ripped open in chunks. Marcus thrust his filthy hand inside the cushion, probing, tearing up the horsehair and springs underneath. He pulled out a handful of padding, tossing it out the car door. Pale yellow tufts of cotton floated in the rain and wind, falling into the mud puddle right beside Isabella's feet. Isabella watched the debris. She remembered the image of Robert wearing his magnifying spectacles, meticulously stitching every seam on this seat on a sunny Sunday afternoon. "I want it perfect for you, Sophie," he'd said, "so you always feel the most comfortable." Now that comfort was being torn apart by a crude man. "Nothing here," Marcus growled, his voice tinged with madness. He turned his attention to the door panel. He didn't try to remove screws properly. He used the knife handle, wedging it into the gap between the leather panel and the metal door frame, then leveraged with all his might. Crack, crunch. The sound of breaking plastic latches was dry and sharp. The door panel warped, the leather wrinkled, then tore away from the frame, hanging loosely like a broken arm. Marcus yanked hard, tearing it off completely and throwing it behind him. He shone the light into the empty door cavity, only the window mechanism and cables. "Damn it," he cursed, kicking the gas pedal hard. "You're hiding it well, bitch, but I'll find it even if I have to dismantle every single bolt on this goddamn car." Isabella stood motionless in the cold mud, her bare feet numb, losing sensation. But her heart was bleeding. Every sound from the car was a knife cutting into her memories. She didn't see Marcus destroying a vehicle. She saw him desecrating her husband's tomb. "Officer," Isabella spoke, her voice deep and trembling slightly, not from fear but from extreme restraint. "You are destroying a legacy. This car, it's not just a vehicle. It is." "Shut up," Marcus shouted back from inside the car. He was fumbling with the center console dashboard. "I don't care about your history. I care about drugs." In front of him was the beautiful walnut dashboard. In the center was the original Becker radio, an extremely rare component. Marcus believed a secret compartment was hidden behind that radio. He didn't know how to remove it properly. He used the only method he knew: violence. He picked up the baton and, with the force of a drunk man losing control, slammed it down onto the polished wood surface. Crack! The lacquer cracked wide open. The rare walnut wood shattered into sharp splinters. Crack! He hit the radio face a second time. The sound of shattering glass crackled. The ivory knobs flew, scattering across the car floor. Marcus tossed the baton aside, using his bare hands to rip out the tangled wires, pulling the entire control unit out. He threw it out the window. It fell to the ground and shattered. A gaping, jagged black hole appeared right in the middle of the dashboard, looking like the eye socket of a hollow skull. Isabella closed her eyes. A hot tear rolled down her cheek, mixing with the cold rainwater. It wasn't a tear of weakness. It was a tear of farewell, crying for her own naivety, the naivety of believing that law and respect still existed in dark places like this. When she opened her eyes, the sorrow was gone. In its place was absolute coldness. Her black eyes were now deep and dangerous, like a loaded gun barrel. "Enough," she whispered. But Marcus hadn't stopped. He climbed out of the driver's cabin, drenched in sweat and rainwater. He panted heavily, his eyes wild. He still hadn't found anything. Failure was turning him into a raging beast. "The trunk," he muttered, walking around the back. "It must be in the trunk." He inserted the key into the rear trunk lock and turned it so hard the key bent, nearly breaking. The trunk lid popped open. Inside was clean, lined with burgundy velvet carpet. There were only a few personal items, an umbrella, a repair kit, and a wooden box. It was a rectangular box made of dark oak, about 31 by 16 centimeters. It was intricately carved with classic vine patterns, and in the center of the lid was an emblem inlaid with gold leaf. Marcus's eyes lit up. "Here it is," he exclaimed, his voice hoarse with excitement. "I knew it, money box or precious gemstones." He snatched the wooden box, slammed the trunk shut, and turned back to Isabella. He held the box up high like a trophy. "You thought you could hide from me," Marcus laughed, revealing his yellow teeth. "What's in here? Pure cocaine, blood diamonds." Isabella looked at the box. That was the repository of the most powerful symbol of her life, and also the repository of a portion of Robert's ashes. "Don't open it, Kane," Isabella said, her voice no longer a warning. It was a declaration of fate. "If you open that box, you will open the gates of hell for yourself." "Hell," Marcus guffawed. "I'm standing in hell right now, old lady, and I am the demon king ruling it." He placed his hand on the lid. He didn't need a key, this box used a simple latch. He flipped it. The lid slowly opened. Under the patrol car's headlights, in the heavy rain, Marcus held his breath, waiting for the shimmering light of jewels. But there was no light. Inside the box, resting on jet-black velvet, was a dark oak object, polished, with a slender handle and a large, dignified hammerhead. A gavel, not a carpentry hammer, not a sledgehammer, it was a judge's gavel. On the hammerhead was a gold-plated round emblem, the Great Seal of the United States, and on the handle a sharp laser-engraved line of text, Honorable Isabella Monroe, Chief Judge, US Court of Appeals. Marcus froze. His limited brain took several seconds to process the image. He'd expected drugs, he'd expected money, he received a piece of wood. Disappointment erupted into blind rage. He didn't read the text. He didn't care about the gold emblem, he just felt tricked. What the hell is this?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "A toy hammer, a carpenter's tool." He picked up the gavel, turning it in his hand with utter contempt. "You drove $1 million car just to carry this goddamn block of wood." He stepped in front of Isabella, now only 2 paces away. "I tore the whole car apart, I ripped up the leather seats, and all you have is this." Marcus raised the judge's gavel high, the sacred symbol of justice that had once been brought down to sentence the most dangerous criminals, and swung his arm with all his might. Splash! The gavel flew through the air, then plopped into the muddy puddle right beneath Isabella's feet. Muddy water splashed up, staining her trousers and bare feet. Marcus didn't stop there. He leaned down, gathered a mouthful of thick phlegm and saliva in his throat, then violently spat a large wad onto the gavel lying in the mud. "Garbage," he declared, just like its owner. That was the moment, the trigger. Time seemed to stop. The sound of rain seemed to vanish. Isabella looked down at the gavel, the symbol of the Constitution, of justice, of her life's work, lying motionless beneath filth and mud. She slowly raised her head. Marcus Kane looked into her eyes, and for the first time tonight, he felt a cold dread run down his spine, not from the rain. He saw her gaze change. No more compliance, no more endurance. It was the gaze of a deity looking down upon a mortal who had just committed blasphemy. Isabella Monroe was no longer the victim. She was back to being Chief Judge Monroe. And the trial of Marcus Kane had just begun, right there in that mud puddle. Marcus Kane's spittle lay on the gleaming gold emblem of the judge's gavel, slowly washing away with the rainwater. But the defilement it left behind was etched deep into the history of that night. Around them, the cedar ridge pine forest echoed with thunder. But strangely, in Isabella Monroe's ears, all the chaotic sounds, the falling rain, the howling wind, Marcus's heavy breathing, vanished. Only absolute silence remained. The silence of a courtroom just before the chief judge reads a death sentence. Isabella no longer looked at the slashed car. She no longer looked at her bare feet turning blue with cold. She also didn't look at the gavel lying in the mud. She looked up. It wasn't the look of a woman who had just regained courage. It was the look of a dragon waking from a long slumber, realizing someone had poked its most sensitive scales. Marcus Kane, panting with morbid triumph, suddenly felt the smile on his lips freeze. He saw the change. The woman standing before him was still wearing thin silk clothes, still drenched, still barefoot. But the way she stood, her shoulders were broad, her back straight as a steel pillar, and her eyes, those eyes no longer contained fear, anxiety, or even contempt. They contained something far more terrifying, power. Raw, overwhelming power that made Marcus, the one holding the baton and the gun, suddenly feel as small as an ant before a giant's heel. What are you looking at?" Marcus growled, trying to dispel the uneasy feeling creeping into his gut. He gripped the baton tighter. "What are you looking at? Do you want me to smash your head like that dashboard?" Isabella did not blink. She took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill her lungs, awakening every nerve cell of an experienced jurist. "Deputy Sheriff Marcus Kane," Isabella began, her voice not loud. She didn't scream to overcome the rain. It was deep, resonant. And every word was clear with the refined cadence of someone who had spent 31 years talking to the best lawyers and the most dangerous criminals in the United States. Title 18, United States Code, Section 1362, Willful Damage to Government Property. Section 2443, Deprivation of Civil Rights under Color of Law. And Section 1112, Assaulting, Resisting, or Imping a Federal Officer. Marcus blinked, astounded. What the hell is that? Are you reading the Bible to me?" "And specifically," Isabella continued, taking one firm step forward, her bare foot stamping down on the mud, "the charge of insulting and assaulting a federal judge in the performance of her duties. The maximum sentence for the combination of acts you have just committed in the past 21 minutes is 46 years in a maximum security prison without the possibility of parole." She pointed down at the gavel in the mud. "That gavel is not a toy. It is the property of the US Court of Appeals, and its owner, the person you just spat on, is me, Chief Judge Isabella Monroe." The space seemed to freeze. Marcus looked down at the gavel, then up at Isabella. His intoxicated and limited brain tried to process this information. "Chief Judge, Federal Court, this black woman." Impossible, no way. In Marcus's world, power was white, and power came with giant pickup trucks or expensive suits, not a lone woman standing in the rain. The fear that had just ignited in him was immediately extinguished by foolish arrogance. He burst into laughter, a wild, contemptuous fit that echoed throughout the forest. "Ha ha ha ha, Chief Judge, you!" Marcus laughed so hard he bent over, tears streaming down his face. "My God, I've heard a lot of lies, but this is the best one. You're the Chief Judge. Then I'm the President of the United States." He straightened up, wiping his tears. His face became ferocious. "Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you think memorizing a few laws from Google can scare me? I'm the police. I know the law better than you. In this town, the law is me." He pointed the baton at Isabella's face. "You just committed another crime, impersonating an officer. You bitch. I'm going to put you in the nastiest cell, sharing a room with some junkies going through withdrawal. Let's see if you can still talk big about the law then." Isabella was unmoved by the threat. She looked at him as one would look at a defendant beyond saving. "I'm giving you one last chance, Kane," she said, her voice icy. "Your only chance to save the rest of your life from rotting in prison." She raised her right hand, spreading 5 fingers. "I give you exactly 5 seconds. 5 seconds to kneel down, pick up that gavel, clean it with your own uniform shirt, and place it back in my hand." If you do that, I will consider the mitigating circumstance that you are mentally deficient. 5. Marcus stared at her. Her audacity drove him mad. You dare count down to me, he roared, throwing the baton to the ground and pulling out handcuffs from his belt. 4. I'll break your hand if you don't shut up. Marcus stepped closer, the cuffs clanking in his hand. 3. Hands behind your back now. He lunged forward, trying to grab her collar. 2. Marcus was very close. He swung the cuffs up, intending to bring them down on her wrist. He had won. He was about to handcuff this fake chief judge. He was about to teach her a lesson about real power. 1. Marcus was inches away. Time's up, Isabella whispered. And that's when Marcus Kane's world collapsed. Not because of a strike from Isabella, but because of another sound. A sound that didn't belong to the natural storm. Thwump, 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 thwump. The sound of rotor blades slicing the air. The shriek of jet turbines. The sound came from above, directly overhead, so massive and powerful that it shook the ground beneath their feet, splashing the puddles. Marcus froze, the handcuff hovering in midair. He looked up at the pitch-black night sky. And the sky opened its eyes. An intensely bright white light, the type of 32 million candle-power searchlight used by the military, suddenly shone straight down from the clouds, enveloping Marcus and Isabella in a column of light as bright as day. Marcus screamed, shielding his eyes because of the blinding glare. The wind from the helicopter's rotors forced him back, blowing his hat away, lashing rainwater onto his face like tiny bullets. It was a black Sikorsky A-61 Blackhawk helicopter. On the side of the aircraft, under the flickering lights, the gold star emblem of the US Marshals appeared menacingly. At the same moment, on the deserted highway, on both the north and south sides, blinding blue LED headlights flared up. 2 black armored SUVs lumbered forward like monsters, crushing the mud beneath their giant wheels. They screeched to a halt, boxing Marcus's patrol car in the middle. Doors flew open. Not 1 but 7 men stepped out. They were not wearing local police uniforms. They wore heavy tactical gear, ballistic helmets, and carried HK-417 assault rifles with bright red laser pointers. 7 tiny red laser dots danced in the rain. And all of them converged on a single spot, the center of Marcus Kane's left chest. A voice boomed from the helicopter's loudspeaker, deep and authoritative, like rolling thunder cutting through the sound of the storm. Marcus Kane, drop your weapons. Step away from Judge Monroe immediately. This is federal marshal service. If you resist, we will use lethal force. Marcus was frozen solid. The handcuff slipped from his hand, falling into the mud with a pathetic plop. He looked at the red dots on his chest. He looked at the helicopter overhead. He looked at the armed agents charging toward him. And finally, he turned his head to look at the woman he had just intended to handcuff. Isabella Monroe was still standing there. Under the helicopter's blinding light, the wind whipped her gray hair and silk clothes. She didn't look up at the sky. She didn't look at the rescue team. She was still looking at him. Her face was cold, emotionless, like a marble statue of justice that had just delivered the final verdict. The warning was over. The time for clemency was over. The cavalry had arrived. Marcus Kane stood rooted in the mud puddle, his eyes wide open, his pupils constricted with fear and the overwhelming intensity of the light that enveloped him. He felt like a microbe being examined under God's microscope. The Blackhawk helicopter's engine roared directly overhead, creating an artificial storm. The wind from the rotors whipped down hard, blowing Marcus's police cap tumbling into the bushes, lashing his face with rainwater that stung like needles. But he didn't dare raise his hands to shield his face. He didn't dare move even a single finger, because 7 blazing red laser dots, the eyes of death, were dancing on his left chest, right on the deputy sheriff badge he'd once been proud of. Drop your weapons immediately. The loudspeaker from the helicopter boomed a second time, firm and uncompromising. It wasn't a warning, it was an ultimatum. Marcus trembled. He looked down at the pistol still holstered on his hip. The instinct of a bully urged him to draw the gun, but the remnant of reason screamed that it was suicide. In front of him, two black armored SUVs. The government's specialized Chevrolet Suburbans with 6-centimeter thick bulletproof glass had stopped completely, blocking every exit from Marcus's patrol car. The car doors opened simultaneously. The people who stepped out were not state police or local officers. They wore ash-gray tactical outfits, Kevlar helmets covering their faces, revealing only sharp eyes through protective glasses. On their thick chest armor was the most powerful and terrifying yellow lettering for any criminal in America, US Marshals. They moved with the speed and precision of an elite military squad. No unnecessary movements, no hesitation. They spread out in a fan formation, their weapons, short-barreled HK-417 assault rifles, locked onto the single target, Marcus Kane. "Don't shoot, don't shoot!" Marcus screamed, his voice breaking, drowned out by the engine noise. He raised both hands high, surrendering unconditionally. The handcuff slipped from his hand, sinking into the mud. A tall man, the commander of the Special Operations Group, stepped out of the first vehicle. He wasn't wearing a mask. His face was cold, determined, with a long scar running down his right cheek. He didn't look at Marcus as a colleague in law enforcement. He looked at Marcus as a terrorist threat that needed to be neutralized. He quickly walked toward Marcus, his pistol drawn, pointing straight at the deputy sheriff's forehead. "Step back," the commander roared, his voice echoing throughout the forest. "Step back from Judge Monroe immediately. Kneel down, hands laced behind your head." Marcus heard the name Monroe. His mind reeled. Chief Judge Monroe. The name sounded familiar. Where had he heard it? On television? In national news reports? Or in the stories his father, the sheriff, used to tell with reverence about the most powerful people in Washington? He looked at the black woman standing a few steps away, the woman he'd just called a car thief, the one he'd forced to stand barefoot in the mud, the one he'd spat on her memento. She was still standing there, motionless, showing no surprise at the arrival of this troop. On the contrary, she stood there like a queen receiving her royal guard. Two other US Marshals immediately rushed to Isabella's side. They didn't handcuff her. They weren't rough with her. One deployed a large black umbrella, shielding her from the pouring rain. The other took off his tactical jacket, gently draping it over her shoulders, covering her soaked silk clothes. "Chief Judge," the agent said, his voice full of respect and concern, "are you all right? We arrived immediately when the emergency signal from the vehicle was activated." Isabella nodded slightly. "I'm fine, Agent Collins, but the court's property is not." Marcus collapsed to his knees, not in compliance, but because his legs had completely given out. He looked at the scene before him as if seeing a hallucination. Chief Judge," he stammered, saliva drooling from his mouth. "No way, she's black." His prejudice was so ingrained that even when the truth was staring him in the face, he couldn't accept it. The SOG commander approached Marcus. He didn't use handcuffs. He delivered a hard, sweeping kick to Marcus's ankle, making him fall face first into the mud puddle, the very puddle where he'd forced Isabella to stand. "Shut up," the commander barked, his knee pressing hard into Marcus's back, forcing his face deep into the filthy earth. "You just committed armed assault against the Chief Judge of the US Court of Appeals. Do you know what the penalty for that is? It's never seeing the light of day again." While Marcus was being restrained, moaning in the mud, another agent, a young woman with sharp eyes, walked toward the damaged Mercedes. She wore rubber gloves, bending down at the muddy puddle where Marcus had stood. She reached her hand into the mud, fumbled briefly, then pulled out an object. The judge's gavel. It was covered in mud and Marcus's disgusting spittle, but under the floodlights, the solid gold emblem still shone defiantly. The female agent took out a white silk cloth from her pocket, carefully wiping the mud and grime off the gavel. She handled it with the reverence one would use to clean a religious artifact. Once the gavel was clean, she walked over to Isabella Monroe. She held the gavel with both hands, bowed slightly, and offered it to her. Chief Judge, she said, yours. Isabella extended her right hand, still cold but steady. She grasped the handle. The familiar feel of dark oak and the weight of authority rushed back, warming her soul. She turned to look at Marcus, who was pinned down on the ground, his face caked in mud, gasping for air like a beached fish. "Make him stand up," Isabella commanded, her voice not loud but carrying a ton of weight. The commander immediately complied. He grabbed Marcus by the armpits, pulling him up to his knees. Marcus trembled violently, not daring to look at her. Isabella walked forward. She didn't need shoes. She stepped barefoot on the gravel road, approaching the man who had humiliated her. She stopped right in front of him, her shadow long, covering his pathetic presence. She used the head of the judge's gavel to gently lift Marcus's chin, forcing him to look her in the eyes. "Look at me, Marcus Kane," she said. Marcus opened his eyes. He saw the black woman he despised. But now he no longer saw her skin color. He only saw an impenetrable fortress. He saw the end of his life in those eyes. "You were right about one thing," Isabella said, her voice smooth but cold as a knife to the throat. "This is a rock-smashing toy." She gently turned the gavel in her hand, letting the light reflect off the US Great Seal emblem. "But it's not the kind of pavement rock you're familiar with. It's the kind of stone used to build prisons, Marcus. And I will personally use it to slam the door of your cell shut forever." Marcus let out a choked sob. He wanted to beg. He wanted to say it was just a misunderstanding. He wanted to call his father. But his throat tightened. He realized every word was meaningless now. He had angered a deity, and now it was time for him to face the punishment. Isabella lowered the gavel. She turned to the US Marshals commander. "Agent Collins," she said, her voice switching to a sharp, professional tone. "Arrest the suspect. Strip his badge and read him his Miranda rights. Don't miss a single word. I want his trial to be perfect." "Yes, Chief Judge," Collins shouted. He flipped Marcus over forcefully, twisting his arms behind his back. The sharp snap of the federal-issue handcuff rang out, locking the deputy sheriff's guilty hands tight. But the drama wasn't over. From afar, the siren of another police car wailed, speeding toward the scene. "That's his father," Marcus whispered in despair. "Dad." Isabella looked toward the approaching headlights. She smiled faintly. "Good," she said. "A family reunion. The prison will have more space." The second police car, an armored Ford Expedition fully equipped with a heavy-duty push bar, slammed into the scene like a maddened rhino. It braked sharply, its wheels skidding on the wet road, stopping just inches from the US Marshals SUV. It was a clear act of defiance. The car door flew open. A man stepped out. It was Sheriff Victor Kane. He was an older, larger, and more dangerous version of Marcus. At 61, Victor still maintained the physique of a former Marine, but his eyes were clouded by 31 years of ruling Cedar Ridge by the law of the jungle. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wore a long leather jacket, a cowboy hat, and his hand was already resting on the large-caliber Colt Python on his hip. Victor saw his son kneeling in the mud, handcuffed, surrounded by strangers. Blood rushed to his face. He didn't see the US Marshal's badge. He only saw someone daring to touch the crown prince of Cedar Ridge. "Let him go," Victor roared, his voice hoarse with tobacco and authority. "Who the hell are you people? Don't you know whose territory this is?" He strode toward Commander Collins, his gun poised, completely ignoring the laser dots switching target to his chest. "Dad, don't," Marcus shouted from the mud puddle, his voice cracked with fear. "They're federal, they are." "I don't give a damn who they are," Victor cut him off, spitting a mouthful of saliva. "In this county, I am the law, I am the judge, I am the jury. Release my son now, or I will shoot every single one of your heads off and call it self-defense." Victor Kane was used to bullying. He was used to state police officers giving way to him because of his dirty political connections. He thought this was just a misplaced SWAT team from a neighboring city. But he was wrong. Isabella Monroe stepped out of the blinding glare of the helicopter's headlights. She was still barefoot, holding the judge's gavel. She walked toward Victor, completely fearless of his gun. "Victor Kane," Isabella called his name, her voice not loud but cutting through his rage like a cold blade. Victor stopped abruptly. He squinted at the black woman standing before him. He recognized the damaged Mercedes behind her. "Ah," Victor snarled, a vicious smile spreading. "It's you, the black bitch my son mentioned. You're the cause of all this mess, huh? Did you call your little gang here to scare me?" He pointed his gun at Isabella. "I'm going to teach you a lesson about respecting the host." Click! The sound of 7 assault rifles chambering rounds simultaneously rang out. "Drop the gun, Victor," Commander Collins yelled. "This is the final warning." But Victor didn't listen. He was too arrogant. He was about to pull the trigger. "You should look closely at this before you kill yourself, Sheriff," Isabella said calmly, raising her left hand. On her hand was a paper wrapped in waterproof plastic. It wasn't car papers. It was a federal arrest warrant. Victor narrowed his eyes, looking at the paper under the headlights. The bright red seal of the Department of Justice was clearly visible, and underneath, the signature of the person who authorized the arrest warrant. He looked up at Isabella, then back at the signature, then back at Isabella. Victor's flushed face turned ashen in an instant. The gun in his hand began to tremble. You are. "I am the person who signed your arrest warrant 4 days ago, Victor," Isabella said, her voice sharp. "I didn't come back here for a hometown visit. I came back here to clean up the trash." She stepped closer, pressing the warrant against his chest. "You thought I didn't know about the empty logging trucks crossing the border. You thought I didn't know about the warehouse full of stolen goods on your farm, or the bank account in the Cayman Islands in your wife's name." Victor stepped back. He looked around. He saw the US Marshals logo on the soldier's armor. He saw the black helicopter overhead. He realized he'd walked into a trap that had been set from Washington, D.C. And his son, the idiot Marcus, was just the spark that detonated the trap sooner than expected. "You can't do this," Victor whimpered, the strength leaving his body. "I have friends, I have a senator." "Your friends are also being arrested," Isabella cut him off coldly, extinguishing his last glimmer of hope. "The FBI is searching their offices right now, and the senator you mentioned, he just announced he doesn't know you on tonight's news." The Colt python slipped from Victor's hand, falling to the ground. Clunk! The sound of surrender. Commander Collins rushed forward. He didn't need to be gentle. He delivered a swift kick to Victor's knee, making the powerful sheriff collapse to the ground, right next to his sobbing son. "Hands behind your back," Collins barked. Victor lay face down in the mud, in the same posture as Marcus. Father and son, 2 generations of corruption, were now prostrate at the feet of the woman they despised. Isabella looked at the scene. She didn't feel triumphant. She only felt a deep weariness, the fatigue of a person who has to witness evil repeating itself through generations. She walked over to Marcus, who was kneeling. He was watching his father being handcuffed with horrified eyes. His worldview, where his father was untouchable, had shattered. "Look, Marcus," Isabella said gently. "This is the legacy your father left you. Not power, not money, just a pair of handcuffs and a prison sentence." She turned to Collins. "Cuff him, and make sure the father and son share the same prisoner transport van. They will have a lot to talk about on the way to federal prison." Collins nodded. He pulled the cuff from his belt, locking Victor's hands tight. "Get up," Collins ordered both of them. Marcus and Victor staggered to their feet, covered in mud. They no longer looked like the rulers of Cedar Ridge. They were just 2 old, pathetic criminals. As they were being escorted past the battered Mercedes gullwing, Victor looked at the car, then at Isabella. In his eyes, there was no more hatred, only belated regret. "You planned all this?" Victor muttered. "No, Victor," Isabella replied, her hand gripping the judge's gavel. "I only brought justice. Your greed and prejudice wrote this script yourselves." She stood watching as the 2 armored vehicles swallowed the Kane father and son. The armored car door hadn't closed yet. Commander Collins raised his hand, signaling a pause. He turned to look at Isabella Monroe, who was still standing there with the judge's gavel in her hand, her bare feet still immersed in the cold mud. Chief Judge, Collins said, his voice deep and solemn. According to the procedure for arresting an on-duty law enforcement official, we need to perform the on-site stripping of authority. Would you like to witness it formally? Isabella looked at the Kane father and son huddled at the edge of the prisoner transport seat. Mud smudged all over the uniforms they once used to intimidate people. Proceed, she said. Let the people of this town see that their power has truly ended. Collins nodded. He signaled 2 agents to pull Marcus and Victor out of the car again. They were dragged out, forced to stand with their backs against the car body under the blinding headlights of the helicopter still hovering overhead. Collins walked in front of Victor Kane, the sheriff of Cedar Ridge. Victor Kane, Collins said loudly, you have defiled the oath to protect the public. With a decisive and forceful motion, Collins grabbed the Silver Star Sheriff's badge pinned to Victor's leather jacket. Rip! The sound of tearing fabric rang out. Collins didn't remove the pin properly. He violently ripped the badge off the jacket, pulling away a section of leather and lining. The badge fell to the ground, lying exposed in the murky water. Victor bowed his head, the last pride of a petty king violently stripped away. Next was Marcus Kane. The deputy sheriff was trembling like a leaf. He watched Collins approach, his eyes wide with horror. He loved that badge. He loved the feeling of people looking at his chest and having to bow. No, don't, he whimpered. Collins said nothing. He grabbed the brass badge on Marcus's soaked shirt. Tear. The badge was ripped off, but Collins didn't stop. He looked down at Marcus's wrist, locked by the standard FBI handcuff. Collins turned to Isabella. Chief Judge, I believe you have a better idea for this one. Isabella stepped forward. She recalled Marcus's earlier threat. I'll use this cuff to put you in a cell. Unlock his cuffs, Isabella ordered. The agents looked at each other in surprise but immediately complied. Marcus's handcuffs were removed. He blankly rubbed his wrist, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Agent, Isabella pointed to the bushes by the roadside, where Marcus had tossed his rusty handcuff earlier in his panic. Retrieve that one. An agent picked up Marcus's old, filthy cuff. Isabella took it. She stepped close to Marcus. You intended to use this on me, she said, her voice icy. You said the law here belongs to you, then taste the flavor of it. She grabbed Marcus's wrist, twisting it behind his back with a decisive force that made him cry out. Click, snap. Isabella locked the rusty cuff onto his hand. She intentionally tightened it one extra click, exactly the way he'd intended to do to his victims. The cold, rough metal cut into his flesh. Too tight, Marcus whined. Pain will help you remember tonight's lesson better. Isabella repeated the exact words he'd said, or intended to say to his victims. Take him away. This time there was no hesitation. Marcus and Victor were thrown back into the armored vehicle like sacks of garbage. The door slammed shut. The sound of the lock clicking rang out, ending the reign of terror of the Kane family in Cedar Ridge. As the convoy began to roll, another agent approached Isabella. In his hand was a pair of Italian leather loafers. Chief Judge, we found your shoes in the bushes. Isabella looked at the shoes. They were covered in mud and leaves, but still intact. She took them. She didn't rush to put them on. She took the Hermes silk scarf, the scarf Marcus had trampled at the beginning, now battered and filthy. She used it to wipe the mud off her feet. The action was deeply symbolic. She used the humiliation of the past to cleanse the present. She put her feet into the shoes. The feeling of warmth and comfort returned. She stood up straight, adjusted her collar, smoothed her hair. The disheveled, wet look vanished. Isabella Monroe was back, more powerful and dignified than ever. She walked to the Merced's 300 SL Gullwing. It was scratched, its seats ripped, its dashboard smashed. It looked like a warrior who had just emerged from hell. Isabella placed her hand on the hood, gently stroking the long scratch Marcus had caused. I'm sorry, Robert, she whispered. I let them hurt you, but in return we saved a whole town. You'd like this trade. Commander Collins approached. Chief Judge, we've called a specialized transport to take this vehicle to the best restoration workshop in D.C. Would you like to join us on the helicopter? Isabella shook her head. She opened the passenger door, placing the clean judge's gavel back into the wooden box, right next to the urn of ashes. No, she said. I'll drive it back. It's wounded, but its heart is still beating, just like mine. She got into the driver's seat, right over the mangled cuts. She turned the key. Vroom. The inline six-cylinder engine roared to life, its sharp, powerful explosion breaking the stillness of the night. The headlights came on, illuminating the road ahead, a road now free of roadblocks. Isabella Monroe fastened her seatbelt. She looked into the rearview mirror one last time, where the lights of the prisoner escort convoy were fading into the distance. Court adjourned, she said. The gold wing sped away, leaving behind the mud puddles and the wreckage of a stormy night, heading straight toward the rising sun. Where are you from? Tell us in the comments below. And if you're loving this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more. 7 months after the fateful storm night in Cedar Ridge, the Federal Court of District 6, located in the state capital, had never witnessed such a large crowd. The polished oak benches of Courtroom 2 were packed. They were reporters from the country's largest newspapers, human rights activists, and most importantly, dozens of former victims of the Kane family. People who had been robbed of their cars, extorted, or beaten by the roadside without daring to speak up. Today, they came to witness the collapse of an empire. The heavy mahogany door opened. The cold, clanking sound of iron chains echoed, cutting off all whispers. Marcus Kane and his father, Victor Kane, walked in. They were no longer wearing their authoritative police uniforms, no longer wearing sunglasses or carrying guns. They wore bright orange, baggy prisoner jumpsuits, revealing the thinness and haggardness of those who had been held in solitary confinement for the past 7 months. Victor, once called the King of Cedar Ridge, now shuffled along, his gray hair sparse, his dull eyes fixed on the floor. Marcus followed behind, chained, his once plump face now sagging from anxiety and lack of sleep. Isabella Monroe sat in the front row, right behind the prosecutor's area. She was not sitting on the high bench to weigh justice. She had voluntarily recused herself from presiding over this case to ensure the absolute objectivity of the law. But even sitting in the gallery, her presence dominated the room. She wore a charcoal gray suit, her hair neatly pinned up, a simple pearl necklace around her neck. She didn't look at the Kane father and son with hatred. She looked at them with the eyes of a surgeon observing a malignant tumor that had been removed. All rise, this court is now in session. The clerk's call echoed. The presiding judge, Sir Benjamin Crawford, struck the gavel. The sound was sharp, solemn, completely unlike the way Marcus Kane had thrown Isabella's gavel into the mud. The federal prosecutor, a young but sharp woman named Maya Torres, stepped up to the podium. She didn't need flowery language, she only needed the truth. Your Honor, members of the jury, Maya said, her voice resonant. For 31 years, Victor Kane and his son turned the town of Cedar Ridge into a private toll booth. They used the police badge as a license to rob. But their crimes didn't stop at corruption. It was systematic cruelty. She pointed toward a cowering Marcus Kane. The defendant, Marcus Kane, claimed he was only performing standard traffic control procedures. He said the victim, Chief Judge Monroe, was uncooperative and insulted him. He said he didn't know who she was. Maya paused for a moment, her eyes sweeping across the jury. But arrogance often comes with ignorance. Defendant Kane was so confident in his power that he forgot the most basic rule of modern policing, turning off his own patrol car's dash cam. The entire courtroom gasped. Marcus Kane lifted his head sharply, his face drained of blood. He remembered that night. He was so intoxicated with tormenting Isabella, so excited about the Mercedes, that he forgot the tiny red light on his car's dashboard was still blinking. I request permission to present Exhibit 1, Maya said. The courtroom lights went out. The large screen behind the judge's bench lit up. The scene of the storm night appeared, vivid and cruel. The audience held their breath. They saw the beautiful Mercedes gullwing pull over to the side. They heard Marcus's slurred, crude voice. "Your kind belongs in the back of a van." They shuddered as they saw him use a knife to rip up the classic car's leather seat. The slash of the knife cutting into the leather echoed through the surround sound system, sounding like flesh being torn, making many turn their faces away in distress. But the most shocking moment was when Marcus forced Isabella to take off her shoes. On the large screen, the image of the powerful black woman standing tall, barefoot in the black mud puddle, appeared, both tragic and painful. She didn't tremble. She stood there like a monument while the officer laughed and threw her shoes into the bushes. Sniffling began to fill the courtroom. Then came the scene with the judge's gavel. The audience saw Marcus pick up the oak gavel. They heard him mock, a rock-smashing toy. And then the entire room gasped in horror simultaneously as they watched him spit a disgusting wad of saliva onto the US Great Seal emblem on the gavel head, then throw it into the mud. Garbage just like its owner. That was not just an insult to Isabella. It was an insult to the Constitution, to the law, and to human dignity. When the video ended, with the US Marshals helicopter floodlights shining down and Marcus's horrified face, the room lights came back on. Silence enveloped the space, a heavy, suffocating silence of repressed outrage. All eyes turned toward Marcus Kane. He didn't dare look at anyone. He buried his face in his hands, trying to hide the shame and fear consuming him. His defense attorney sat beside him, his face pale, knowing that no defense in the world could save his client after that video. Victor Kane, the once powerful father, now sat dazed like a corpse. He knew that his son's ignorance and cruelty had officially ended the Kane family's reign. Isabella Monroe remained still. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stared straight at the men who once thought they were gods in Cedar Ridge. Prosecutor Maya turned back, looking straight at the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said softly but firmly, "the defendant called Chief Judge Monroe garbage. But this video clearly shows us who is truly the stain that needs to be washed away from society." She pointed at the Kane father and son. "Don't let them act in the name of the law for one more day." The jury returned to the courtroom after less than 1 hour of deliberation. This speed, in a complex federal trial, was unprecedented. But with undeniable evidence like the dash cam video, no one needed more time to debate the truth. The entire courtroom stood up as Judge Benjamin Crawford returned to the high bench. "Defendants, please rise." Marcus Kane and his father, Victor, slowly stood up. The clanging sound of the ankle chains was like the moan of wounded animals. Victor had to lean on the edge of the table for balance, his feet that once trampled the law now trembling uncontrollably. Marcus kept his head bowed, cold sweat soaking his prisoner collar. The jury representative, a middle-aged woman with a solemn expression, held the verdict sheet in her hand. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear, "regarding the charges against Marcus Kane and Victor Kane, we have reached a verdict." The space was filled with absolute silence. Even the sound of the air conditioning seemed to stop. On the charge of civil rights violations, guilty. Victor closed his eyes. Marcus let out a sob. On the charge of willful damage to government property, guilty. On the charge of assaulting a federal officer, guilty. On the charge of extortion and organized corruption, guilty. Every guilty rang out like a nail being hammered into the coffin of the father and son's freedom. A total of 25 charges, not a single acquittal. Judge Crawford nodded. He looked down at the two criminals through his reading glasses, his eyes showing undisguised contempt. "Marcus Kane," the judge said, "the defendant was entrusted with a badge and a gun to protect the public. Instead, the defendant used them as tools to satisfy a sick ego and bottomless greed. The defendant insulted the dignity of a human being and blasphemed the symbol of justice. The court sentences the defendant to 16 years in federal prison." Marcus slumped onto the chair. 16 years. He was only 36 years old. When he gets out of prison, he will be a 52-year-old man with nothing. But the judge wasn't finished. He shifted his gaze to Victor. "Victor Kane, the defendant is even worse than his son. The defendant was the head of the law enforcement agency, but operated the town of Cedar Ridge like a family crime organization. The defendant condoned, covered up, and encouraged this brutality for 3 decades. The judge lightly tapped his fingers on the desk. The court sentences the defendant to 21 years in prison. Given the defendant's current age, the court understands this may be a life sentence. Victor didn't react. He was already dead inside. He knew he would die in prison, alone and forgotten. However, the judge raised his voice, stopping the murmurs beginning to rise in the room. Justice is not only about physical punishment, it is also about stripping away what the defendant illegally stole. He opened another thick file. Under the Federal Civil Asset Forfeiture Act, the very law the defendants abused to rob the public, the court orders the seizure of all the Kane family's assets. Victor's eyes widened. That was the fatal blow. He could endure prison, but losing the empire he'd painstakingly built with the blood and tears of others was more painful than death. The seizure order includes the 515-acre farm in Cedar Ridge, the Florida vacation villa, foreign bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, and the judge paused, looking directly at Victor with a sarcastic smile. Specifically, the court orders the seizure of the collection of 13 classic cars hidden in the defendant's barn. All these vehicles are identified as assets stolen or illegally seized from victims over the past 22 years. Victor let out a painful groan as if stabbed in the heart. The car collection, his pride, his reason for living, all lost. All these assets will be sold at auction, the judge concluded. The proceeds will be used to establish the Cedar Ridge Victim Compensation Fund, paying for those who were extorted, beaten, and wrongly imprisoned by the Kane family during their tenure. Thump! The wooden gavel struck down, sharp, decisive. The trial was over. Judicial marshals approached, helping the father and son to their feet. "Dad, do something," Marcus cried miserably, tears and snot smearing his haggard face. "Dad, I don't want to go to prison." Victor didn't answer. He shuffled away like an empty shell. As he walked past the front row, he looked up at Isabella Monroe. Isabella was still sitting there, calm and dignified. She didn't look at him with hatred. She looked at him as one would look at debris that needed to be cleaned up. Victor wanted to say something, a curse or a plea, but his throat was choked. He saw the lapel pin on Isabella's jacket, a small golden scale of justice. It shone brightly, blinding him. The father and son were dragged out of the courtroom through the defendant's door. The clanking of iron chains on the wooden floor was the last sound they left for the free world. Outside the courtroom, the crowd erupted. Former victims hugged each other. An old man who'd had his cargo truck stolen by Victor raised his hands to the sky, shouting, "Justice! Finally, justice!" Isabella stood up. She straightened her suit jacket, picked up her handbag. She turned and nodded to prosecutor Maya Torres, then quietly walked out of the room through a private exit. She didn't need the applause. She didn't need the press interviews. She'd done her job. She'd used the very tools the wicked employed, the law and forfeiture, to defeat them. She walked out into the silent hallway behind the courthouse. The afternoon sun streamed through the glass windows, illuminating the floor. Isabella stopped, taking a deep breath. The air here was fresh, no longer smelling of Cedar Ridge's mildew, no longer smelling of corruption. She took out her phone, dialing a familiar number. "Monroe Restoration Workshop, how can I help you?" A voice answered on the other end. "It's me, Isabella," she said, her voice gentle. "How is the patient doing?" "Chief Judge," the master mechanic replied, his voice excited. "We just finished the final silver coat. The gullwing is ready. It looks as if it's never had a scratch. Mr. Robert would definitely be very proud." Isabella smiled, a radiant smile that wiped away all the fatigue on her face. "Good," she said. "I'm coming to pick it up. It's time to bring it home." The town of Cedar Ridge was no longer a speed trap town. 4 months after the Kane family's arrest, Cedar Ridge underwent an unprecedented major overhaul. The entire town council was dissolved for complicity and corruption. An interim committee was appointed by the Department of Justice to govern, with the top priority of restoring public trust. The rusted, bullet-riddled "Welcome to Cedar Ridge" sign was taken down. In its place was a new, bright sign with the words, "Safe and Transparent Community." But the biggest change wasn't in the signs. It was in Washington, D.C., where Isabella Monroe stood before the Senate Judiciary Committee. She wasn't there to complain. She was there to legislate. "Senators," Isabella said, her voice echoing throughout the chamber, "Marcus Kane is not an anomaly. He is a symptom of a disease, the disease of abuse of power in remote areas where there are no surveillance cameras and no public scrutiny." She held up a thick file. "This is the Cedar Ridge Act. It is written in ink, but it is signed with the tears of innocent victims." The Cedar Ridge Act passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, bringing revolutionary changes to law enforcement in rural and border areas. Absolute transparency. All police officers in counties with a population under 51,000 are required to wear new generation body cameras. This camera features live streaming directly to a central Department of Justice server and cannot be manually turned off by the officer. Any incident of signal loss during duty will automatically trigger an internal investigation. Independent hotline. Establishment of an abuse reporting hotline directly to the federal Chief Judge's office, bypassing local authorities entirely to prevent cover-ups. Immediate compensation. Clear regulation on the seizure of corrupt officials' assets to immediately compensate victims, instead of waiting for civil litigation processes that last years. When the president signed the bill into law, Isabella knew she'd completed her mission. She hadn't just sought revenge for her own humiliation. She'd created a shield to protect thousands of others, people who might drive through a small town on a rainy night sometime in the future. Back in Cedar Ridge, the atmosphere had changed. The town police station, once a criminal den, was repainted a bright white. Torn flags were replaced. But more important than all of that were the people. One beautiful morning, Isabella drove the Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing, now perfectly restored like new, to park outside the police station. Stepping out to greet her was a young black female officer named Sophia. Sophia was a former administrative employee whom Marcus Kane had harassed and suppressed for 6 years because she dared to speak up about suspicious expenditures. Today, on Sophia's chest was the sheriff's badge. "Good morning, Chief Judge," Sophia said, a radiant smile on her face, her eyes gleaming with hope. "Have you come to check on the situation?" "No, Sheriff," Isabella smiled, taking off her sunglasses. "I've come to give you this." She handed Sophia a small wooden box. Sophia opened it. Inside was a shiny brass key, the master key to the Cedar Ridge Police Department, which Victor Kane once wore on his belt as a symbol of unchallenged power. "This key once opened doors of fear," Isabella said. "Now I want you to use it to open the door of trust." Sophia gripped the key tightly, her eyes welling up. "I won't let you down." "I know," Isabella nodded, "because you know what it feels like to stand in the mud, and a good leader never forgets that position." Isabella returned to the Gullwing. The car shone brightly in the sunlight, its old scars healed, just like her soul. She lightly touched the hood where Marcus's baton had once tapped. No trace remained. She sat in the driver's seat, the fragrant leather scent enveloping her again. This time there were no knife slashes, no destruction, only peace. She turned the key. The engine roared to life, the sound strong and vibrant. Sophia stood at attention in a police salute as the Gullwing slowly rolled away. Isabella drove through the streets of Cedar Ridge. She saw the residents waving to her. She saw children playing safely by the roadside. She saw a town being reborn. She turned on the radio. Bach's cello, Suite No. 1, played again, but this time it didn't sound sad. It sounded like a victorious anthem. The car sped away, heading toward the setting sun that was painting the horizon red. Isabella didn't look back at the police station. She knew Cedar Ridge was safe, but she also knew that her mission in this town still had one important unfinished task. "True power does not lie in the badge on my chest, nor the gavel in my hand. It lies in the integrity within every human heart. And when that integrity is broken, no darkness is deep enough, no rain is heavy enough, and no place is far enough to escape the light of justice. However, Isabella didn't drive straight onto the highway to return to Washington. As she reached the Forest Junction, she gently steered the wheel. The Merced's gullwing did not vanish into the sunset, but turned onto the familiar gravel path leading deep into the pine forest, heading toward the Cedar Ridge River. After leaving the Cedar Ridge police station with the hopeful smile of the new Sheriff Sophia, Isabella didn't drive back to Washington immediately. She turned the car onto a small gravel path leading deep into the pine forest, heading toward the upstream of the Cedar Ridge River. This was exactly where she'd intended to go on that fateful stormy night 7 months ago, before being stopped by Marcus Kane. The Merced's 300 SL gullwing glided smoothly, the suspension perfectly restored, absorbing every vibration of the rough road. The space was quiet, with only the sounds of birds chirping and pine needles rustling in the afternoon wind. Isabella stopped the car by the riverbank. The Cedar Ridge River water today was crystal clear, reflecting the brilliant golden light of the sunset, unlike the muddy, swirling waters of that night. She opened the car door, the gullwing door soaring proudly to greet the sunlight. Isabella took the dark oak box from the passenger seat. She stepped out of the car, walking to the water's edge. She was no longer walking barefoot on cold mud. She was walking on lush green grass, her Italian leather shoes clean and steady. She opened the box. Next to the powerful judge's gavel was a small ceramic urn, simple yet elegant, Robert's ashes. Isabella opened the lid of the urn. She looked down at the gently flowing river. "We took a little longer than planned, Robert," she whispered, her voice choked but happy. "I'm sorry, I had to stop and clean up some trash along the way." She tilted the urn. The fine white ash poured out, mingling with the wind, fluttering lightly over the water's surface, then gently dissolving into the golden-flecked current. "Do you see this town?" Isabella spoke to the river as if Robert were there. "It's clean now. No more police stopping cars for extortion. No more women having to be afraid to drive through here at night. I changed it, Robert. I used this gavel and the strength you believed I had to rewrite the rules." She stood there for a long time until the last particle of ash vanished. She felt an immense relief. The burden of the past, the pain of the humiliation, and the heavy responsibility of justice, all seemed to be washed away by the river, leaving behind a tranquil soul. Isabella returned to the car. She placed the empty urn into the box next to the gavel. Two objects, one representing lost love, one representing current strength. They lay side by side, balanced and perfect. She sat in the driver's seat, closing the car door. She looked into the rearview mirror. The reflection was no longer a grieving widow or humiliated victim. It was the image of Chief Judge Isabella Monroe, the protector of justice, the one who had triumphed over evil with steadfastness and wisdom. People often say justice is blind, but I don't believe that. Justice needs to see everything. It needs to see the scratch on a classic car, see the bare feet in the cold mud, and see the arrogance in the eyes of the abuser. Only by seeing the naked truth can justice bring down the decisive gavel. Isabella turned the key. The legendary inline six-cylinder engine roared to life with a powerful, vibrant sound. True power does not lie in the badge on the chest, but in the integrity of the heart. And when that integrity is lit, no darkness is deep enough to hide the crime. She engaged the gear, pressing the accelerator. The silver car sped away, leaving the gentle Cedar Ridge River behind. In front of the windshield, the sun was setting, painting the entire horizon a brilliant, magnificent color. Isabella drove straight into that light, ready for the next trials, the next battles. Because she knew that on the long roads of this country, there was still much work to be done.